I'm Brian Cullinan, an instructor in the Music Industry Studies program at the Hayes School of Music at Appalachian State University. My presentation today, prepared by myself and Professor Kim Wangler, is Music and Pop Culture, Charting Connections, Past, Present, and Future. Popular culture can be difficult to define. Sociologists consider popular culture to be the set of practices, beliefs, and objects that embody the most broadly shared meanings of the social system. Areas of popular culture may include various forms of media, entertainment and leisure pursuits, and fashion. These cultural areas often work together in concert to produce broad-scale societal trends. The term popular culture is a little academic, and for the purposes of this presentation, I'm going to use the more colloquial term pop culture, which also has a slightly different connotation, pop culture meaning more 20th century mass culture. So in this presentation, we're going to establish how pop culture can act as a driver to influence music trends. We're going to review some resources available to help gauge those cultural trends. And then we're going to utilize some of those resources to briefly examine a few current trends. Music is an influential component of contemporary American popular culture, and it frequently acts as the spark to ignite larger trends. The British invasion in the early 1960s is a potent example of a widespread cultural trend that was shaped by music. In late 1963, British Beatlemania was introduced to American teenagers to famous effect. Other British music acts such as Donovan, Herman's Hermits, the Hollies, the Rolling Stones, and The Who followed. A wave of Anglophilia swept across the heartland, and American popular culture was transformed in its wake. British television shows such as The Saint, The Avengers, and Secret Agent broke into the US TV market. British fashion, from mod suits to miniskirts, appeared on the pages of US fashion magazines and were championed by a new wave of British sex symbols such as Twiggy and Sean Connery. Mary Poppins became the highest-grossing film of 1964, and My Fair Lady went on to win 8 Academy Awards that year. In April of that year, Ford launched the Mustang, a mid-sized sports car influenced by the long-nosed, short-tailed design favored by British sports car manufacturers, such as Jaguar and Aston Martin. Ford hammered home that British connection by securing product placement for the Mustang in the 1964 James Bond film Goldfinger, and then again the following year in Thunderball. From the Mustang to the miniskirt, British-inspired trends went on to dominate American popular culture throughout the remainder of the 1960s, and it had all been sparked by music. During the 1970s, disco grew out of the underground urban dance music scene and rose to pop culture prominence by the end of that decade. Disco culture spilled out of the avant-garde nightclubs and into the American mainstream. The release and subsequent success of Saturday Night Fever in 1977 solidified disco's position at the pinnacle of American popular culture. In the early 1990s, Pacific Northwest rock bands helped launch the grunge movement, which similarly overtook American pop culture. Flannel shirts and combat boots entered the fashion scene. Words like thrifting and slacker joined the American lexicon, and the movie Singles became a generational hit. Again, both of these broad-scale popular culture trends were ushered in by music. Music led, and the other elements of culture followed. So it's clear that music has been a powerful driver of pop culture throughout the 20th century. But what happens when the inverse is true? What happens when other elements of culture lead and music does the following? Is this even possible? The answer, emphatically, yes. I'll give a couple of examples, a historic example and a modern example, to show that this is possible, but also with the idea that this is why it's important that we follow pop culture trends. And as students of the music industry, we also become in some ways students of popular culture, because popular culture has the power to sometimes shape music in its wake. So let's take a look at a couple of those trends. So the most famous of these historical examples probably is the urban cowboy phenomenon of the late 1970s. When we think about urban cowboy and we think about the movie, we really think about the soundtrack and the music. And as music industry professionals, we'll probably also think about the impact that that movement had on the charts. It resuscitated a lot of careers. It ushered in a huge wave of country music. into the Hot 100 charts, into popular culture, left its impact throughout the early part of the 1980s. However, this is not a movement that was started by music. If you rewind back to 1978, the Dallas TV show really was the first part of penetrated popular culture, probably before anything else, in April of 1978. And also that year, there was an article that was written in Esquire magazine called "The Urban Cowboy: The Search for America's True Grit," that also kind of launched and captured this movement that was bubbling under, that had more to do with fashion and the ostentatious displays of wealth taking place in Texas because of the oil money and other things, but not a lot to do with music. So this was a movement, and it was a phenomenon in popular culture. But at the time, in 1978, it really lacked musical accompaniment. Other elements of culture were embracing parts of this movement, but music was a little slow to follow. So you fast forward then to 1980, you have the release of the Urban Cowboy movie, and the number of songs that flowed through that affected the music charts. So if you look at the Hot 100 chart in 1978, there was only one country artist that appeared on the Hot 100 chart for 1978. I believe it was Dolly Parton. You fast forward to 1980, and it's the Hot 100 chart is littered with country artists, and it's because music had finally caught up to this trend. Irving Azoff produced The Urban Cowboy. A couple of years later, he also produced Fast Times at Ridgemont High, another movie that famously capitalized on an element of popular culture that was kind of happening before music. The West Coast, 1980s West Coast surfer movement used that movement to introduce us to music artists via that Ridgemont High soundtrack. But in all of these, it was relatively easy back then. The trends were relatively easy to spot. They had a kind of a long lead up and a long tail and a pretty long life. In today's age, that's something that we don't really have. In the hyper-connected, hyper-communicative age of the internet, trends come and go very quickly. So, whereas the trend spotters of the 1970s and 1980s had a very long lead on these trends, for us, it's a little different. These trends happen very quickly, and it's therefore important that we employ as many tools as possible to spot them. So let's take a look at a modern trend that happened very quickly. In 2018, we have a different sort of urban cowboy movement. We have the release of Lil Nas X's Old Town Road, which of course was a phenomenon in and of itself. But if you weren't closely following popular culture, you may have missed the fact that it was cradled within this larger urban cowboy, if you will, movement termed the Yeehaw Agenda. So what was the Yeehaw Agenda? The Yeehaw Agenda was a cultural movement that was born online, mainly made up of hip-hop artists and others that were exploring their country roots with a mix of camp and glam and nostalgia, kind of having fun with it. And the effects of this were seen in internet meme culture. They were seen in the works of other artists. And this is something that started to bubble under around 2018 or so. So it was embraced by Cardi B and Solange Knowles and Megan Thee Stallion and others. But it was a moment when internet culture kind of converged with music to produce this. So if you were a music industry executive who was diligently following pop culture at the time, you would have almost expected a song like this to avail. For the rest of us, we thought, gee, this is interesting that there's a song with cowboy ephemera and a cowboy feel to it that's been released by this hip hop artist, and it may have seemed like it kind of fell from the sky, but it really different. It really didn't. It was cradled in this overarching internet popular culture that was bubbling under at the time. So some examples of this I've displayed here. Twitter examples of conversations that were going on in early 2018 discussing the Yeehaw Agenda movement. And you notice by the dates that preceded, it was about the time that Lil Nas X self-released his version of the record. But it was well in advance of the real success that the record had. Columbia Records signed Lil Nas X, I believe, March of 2019. And the remix video with Billy Ray Cyrus that garnered the most views was April of 2019, I believe. So this conversation was happening well in advance. Why is this important? Well, obviously, Old Town Road was a tremendous hit. Topped the Hot 100 for 19 consecutive weeks and was one of the longest chart runs of any record in the last 30 years. 2.9 billion on-demand streams, diamond certification. This was a massive hit. But the important thing to remember here is if you don't understand the underlying popular culture context that kind of helped loft the song to its prominence, you don't fully understand why this happened or why it may happen again. As we say this, there's without a doubt in my mind, there's another movement like this and perhaps another song like this that's lining up in the pipeline. So as students of the music industry, we're curious about how and why these things happen, how do hits develop. This is a way that hits are developing right now, and it's happening kind of in the blink of an eye. Movements that are being driven by culture online. So how do we spot these trends? The majority of contemporary pop culture habits are reflected in online media habits. So it's really about tracking online culture. Most major popular culture shifts can therefore be identified by analyzing media consumption and social media trends. We're lucky in that the majority of big social media portals are now producing periodic trend reports, and we're going to look into that in a moment. And then there are also a number of commercial entities that are out there, marketing agencies and others that are producing these reports. But what we're going to do here is we're going to examine 6 easy and free to use sources that'll get you acquainted with pop culture as it stands right now and give you an idea of where it is that you can look, where you can go to if you want to keep your finger on the pulse of what's happening and perhaps what's informing the next music trend to happen. So in the interest of time, I won't go over each of these 6 sources that I list here, but I'll just briefly introduce you to them. Trend Hunter is a commercial service. They're a company that's based out of Canada that actively employs people to go out and search out trends online, uses some great AI technology to figure out what trends are bubbling under. They work for about 500 different brands. They're pretty much the best in the business, but they produce a great free report, and I linked to it in the Trend Hunter slide there. I'd suggest reading that. It's a big, lengthy report, but it has a lot of great information. If you're interested in what's going on culturally on YouTube right now, the YouTube Culture and Trends section has great information, links to all of that as well. Twitter launched something called The Conversation recently. The Conversation contains a lot of deep Twitter data, deep cultural analysis data in terms of what's going on inside Twitter. Facebook IQ is the section of Facebook that covers trends within Facebook. A little more commercial minded than the others, a little less data oriented, a little more commercial minded, but nevertheless some great insights from the world of Facebook. The Instagram Trend Report, something that's new for 2022, some great insights as to what goes on inside of Instagram. There are some fantastic polls that they conducted, and I linked to all of that and put some of that information up on the slide, but you're going to want to take a look at that if you're interested to see some of the macro trends that are surrounding music right now inside the Instagram world. And last but not least, the TikTok Creative Center. So TikTok, of course, has come onto the scene within the last couple of years. Very strong, a great place to launch music careers. The TikTok Creative Center gives a lot of insight as to what's going on inside the world of TikTok too. So also I wanted to mention some other platforms, Twitch and Reddit and PixArt. There's some others that are kind of similar to PixArt that are launching right now. They're very similar to TikTok, looking to take on that TikTok video world. None of these really have great reports right now, but it's just good to keep an eye on them. So I mentioned them just to say that they're having an impact on popular culture right now. Hopefully, like some of these others, they'll launch data reports and give you some insights over the course of the next year or so. So that's a synopsis, and again, all that information is linked in the presentation. Please go to that, refer to that, and there's a wealth of data there. So a couple other things that I included as well. Some specific, if you take a look at the slide, what's now trending, some micro trends. There are some great micro trends, and again, in the interest of time, I won't go into detail here, that speak to music. One is the gathering space phenomena, streams of lo-fi hip hop. The most popular and prominent artist in that world is Lo-Fi Girl. It's a stream that has over 930 million views. You're going to want to take a look at that. I've linked to that in the presentation. Give you an idea of what that lo-fi gathering space phenomena is all about and what that means for music potentially. The in another room phenomena is something it's very hard to explain. So it's a good thing that I have a link up here. You can go directly to the link and take a look at the in another room video that Lil Nas X created for Montero. It's kind of self-explanatory. It'd be very hard for me to explain here. Just watch the video. But it's basically listening to a video in a separate space. So it's the idea of a detached space. These detached spaces are becoming very popular. So something that also has implications for, obviously, for music. So something to be aware of. And then last but not least, Minecraft and gaming culture in general, but specifically the Dream SMP world, which I've got a couple of links up there. One is to the South by Southwest panel that discussed some of this, but one that specifically discussed Minecraft. This Minecraft world is a virtual world. These virtual worlds are coming on strong. This particular virtual world has been described as a mix between the West Wing and Minecraft. There are artists writing songs about the narratives that users are developing in this virtual world right now. So once again, if you hear one of these songs, or if you're aware of the fact that an artist has recorded a song that has to do with Dream SMP, if you don't know the pop culture trend, you're not going to be apprised of what it is that they're doing. So this is an area of explosive growth right now, and it's worth giving a look just to become acquainted with it. So some of the big macro trends, again, in the interest of time, I won't go over these specifically, but social causes in terms of how that bodes for music. What does that mean for the future of socially aware music? Could there be a resurge of socially aware music, perhaps? Wellness and escapism. I linked to a Spotify soundtrack that specifically deals with some wellness-oriented music. It's an interesting trend in music. It's almost similar to world music, the world music trend, kind of music with a calming influence, very popular right now. Micro-influencers, I threw that in because I feel that there's going to be a convergence at some point between the micro-influencer world and what we traditionally viewed as online street teams. So how do micro-influencers, we know that how do micro-influencers affect music? We know that they affect trends in a big way, and there's some data in some of those reports that'll give you a little bit of background on that. But I feel that micro-influencers have a place in music marketing, and we've kind of yet to embrace that. Last but not least, global entertainment content. There's been some huge global movements. Borders are dropping, physical borders are dropping. K-pop was a part of that, but it's by no means the end. So there's a great link here that'll give you a little bit more information on that and get you some data on that as well. So how does this bode for the music business classroom, for the music industry studies classroom? We know that popular culture will continue to influence music trends well into the future. It's happening very quickly, and by looking at these sources and becoming acquainted with this data, it helps students stay ahead of trends that will inform music in the same way that it has been informing music over the last decade. So we're preparing them, the next generation of music industry professionals, to be aware of this increased metabolic shift and to know where to go and look for the information. It's also an opportunity to introduce students to the inner workings of social media platforms, something that we don't always get a chance to do. Perhaps it's also an opportunity to introduce students to a guest speaker that might come from this world, someone that works at a digital marketing agency or an advertising agency that specializes in social media trends. Last but not least, your students are of this world. They're mostly those that occupy these spaces that we've been talking about. So it presents a chance for a really lively discussion where perhaps you can learn something from the students as well in terms of the trends that they're helping to create that will influence music. So in conclusion, this has just been a small sample of data. Again, in the interest of time, I've just left a lot to the presentation to do. Please check out those links. view those reports. There's a wealth of information there. We hope that this starts a conversation, a larger conversation about integrating trend analysis and cultural data into music education programs. So with that, we thank you very much for viewing our presentation today, and we look forward to any further conversation that may spark out of this. Thank you.